Hello and welcome. Today we are dealing with Chapter 10 of Andrew Kernohan's Business Ethics, focus on autonomy and privacy. And here we will tackle these two ideas. Autonomy is the ability to make our own decisions. Privacy is the ability to control access to our personal information and lives. So here are some guiding questions for today. Are businesses moral agents? What threatens our ability to make autonomous choices? And why is privacy essential to human dignity, if it is? So let's take a look at autonomy. There are two kinds, moral autonomy and personal autonomy. Moral autonomy is the ability to live by your ethical values. In our system, it's the ability to pursue your highest moral value. But personal autonomy is the freedom to choose your values in the first place. So your ability to pick what you will pick as your highest moral value. In short, personal autonomy is the freedom to choose what matters, but moral autonomy is the freedom to live in line with what matters. So let's picture autonomy and consent as a pyramid. At the base we have two stones, truth, which is access to honest and relevant information to the best of our ability to know what is true, and the other one is competence, the ability to understand that information and to synthesize it so that you may make use of it. Together, these two enable autonomy, the genuine ability to make a free choice. And once we have autonomy, then we can get consent, the choice to do or not do something made by an informed and competent agreement. Without truth or competence, consent is just an illusion. Now, paternalism is when somebody makes a choice for you for your own good. And it often says something like, you can't handle the truth, you're not competent, and therefore we will decide what you may consent to, or we might even consent to it on your behalf. Now, there are certainly cases where this is necessary, like with little children who do not understand what's happening, and they're certainly not competent to make medical choices and things of that nature. But this extends far beyond children and into lives of adults. And there it erodes autonomy and reduces humans to passive recipients, not moral agents. Now, there are two types of autonomy rights. As noted before, negative rights are freedom from interference, and so you have a right to refuse. And then you have positive rights, which is a freedom to do something, i.e. access healthcare or education. For example, you may be free to speak, but if no one lets you on the mic, do you really have that right? Businesses can impact both by setting rules that silence speech, negative rights, or by enabling or disabling opportunities, positive rights. Now, what exactly counts as private? In today's digital world, the line is blurred. 20 years ago, being drunk at 4 a.m. on your toilet was just sad. But now it's potentially viral. Privacy used to mean something like when I'm home alone. But now it's what I haven't posted yet. And employers are increasingly likely to look into your personal social media. So the question for us is, should they be allowed to? And should they be allowed to make choices based on things that are not related to your work, but only your personal life? So here's a thought experiment. Let's suppose we have Bob, and Bob is a Nazi in private. He doesn't say it at work, he doesn't act on it, there's no visible signs that would let you know that Bob is a Nazi, but it is there. Now, is it ethical to fire them or to deny them a job if you find out that they are a Nazi? If yes, would we also be okay with firing somebody or denying them a job opportunity for holding other kinds of private beliefs, maybe on the basis of their sexuality or religion or gender identity? And right here you may be tempted to say, well, hold on, those aren't the same things. You can't fire somebody because of their gender. But you can certainly equate the two in the following sense. Both positions, really all positions, can be understood through a moral lens. And so somebody who wholeheartedly believes in the Old Testament would view somebody's sexual orientation as being abhorrent, in the same way that you would look at a Nazi and think to yourself, well, that's morally abhorrent. So, where exactly would we draw the line between private beliefs and public accountability? And should businesses be allowed to draw these lines if the issue in question is not one that actually affects job performance? Next, in terms of work, conscience, and consequences, what happens when personal values clash with job obligations? Well, there are certainly cases where personal values clash with job requirements, and in some cases it may be possible to accommodate those values, but in other cases they create a problem for the job itself. So there's an example of a Kentucky court clerk who refused to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples after the Supreme Court ruling legalizing. Now, she had taken her job knowing the legal obligations of her job, and she signed off on those. And so when the law changed, her duties did as well. So once those duties changed, she had two reasonable options. One, she could quit her job if she did not want to follow the new law based on her personal beliefs. Or she could stay at her job and follow the law. But what she did was she stayed at her job but refused to do the job. And that's where a problem cropped up, because you can't morally keep the paycheck but refuse to work. From a contractarian perspective, you can think of it this way. The paycheck that this person was supposed to collect is based on the performance of the job obligations. So if you refuse or fail to fulfill your job obligations, then the employer is not obligated to pay you the money. That is, to keep you on the payroll. So when one party violates their contractual obligation, the other party is no longer required to keep up their end of the bargain. Our author has a couple of interesting examples regarding autonomy and coercion. And so he writes, if Nancy's boss prevents her from doing the right thing, then she is not morally responsible. But there's something wrong, deeply wrong, with that line of thinking. In my own background, which is on war ethics, we would simply turn this into a military example. And now the line would say something like, because Bob's commander told him to commit a war crime, Bob is not morally responsible for committing a war crime. And you can see that that's a bad argument, because orders don't erase ethics. If you act immorally, even under pressure, you are still you. Fraud and deception, they attack the truth pillar of autonomy. Coercion attempts to attack the autonomy itself, but ultimately you are in charge of what it is that you do. There's a similar example later on when our author says that a woman under threat from her abusive partner can't be morally responsible. But this is tricky, because while coercion does limit autonomy in some ways, people do still make choices. And in this case, there is some version of a choice to stay, and that can have consequences, especially for others, like children subject to the same kind of abuse in a relationship. And if we're okay stripping autonomy away from a person in such a situation, then we're left with similar examples elsewhere. In gangs, similar dynamics apply. There is high pressure and low autonomy, but we still hold people accountable for their actions. The key here might be something like degrees of autonomy rather than complete absence. And so at a particular point, your available degree of autonomy might prevent you from reasonably being able to act a certain way without it being a completely binary setup. Later on, our author quotes Mill when he says that the protection from government tyranny is not enough. We must also be protected from society imposing its values by shame and pressure. But there's a problem there. In fact, there's a number of problems there. The first one is, In order to be tolerant, we must become intolerant of intolerance. That is how we will prevent the society from imposing its values. But who decides what exactly falls under intolerant? What if society pressures you to conform under the label of inclusion? And then we have another set of examples where rules imposed by society, like do not use the roads as a public toilet and do not sexually assault other people, are rules that we most definitely want imposed on everybody. And we would prefer to be able to do so by pressure rather than by force. But these ideas are not really up for debate. Now notice this isn't just philosophy. This is policy, it's hiring, it's education, it's media. So in sum, autonomy demands access to truth and the ability to think. Privacy protects our freedom to develop our inner lives. Paternalism and social control become threats to both privacy and autonomy, and ethics must somehow balance freedom, responsibility, and respect for individuals and for societies. So, what does it take to treat someone as a full person and not just as a cog in the system? The answer to that is the heart of autonomy and privacy in business ethics.